the country, international flights heading towards the United States are being diverted into Canada this morning. Patty, let me go back to you as we look at some tape from the ground. Patty, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Okay, Aaron, I'm in the main building of Pace University, which is inside the fallout zone of all the debris from the two building collapses. At the time of the first building collapse, I was at Broadway and Park Place. There was a huge cloud of smoke. It overcame the crowd. People were stampeding. Literally, the debris was so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I ducked around into a building that was on Park Place and Beekman Street. When I was in there, people were coming in. They were crying. They were wailing. You couldn't see anything outside. After the smoke had cleared a little bit, I came outside. The scene was like a ghost town in the financial district, very eerie. You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. People were coming out with masks over their face, anything they could put over their face, because the air was still very thick with debris. The ash on the ground is at least 2 inches thick. It's more like snow cover, a very eerie snow cover blanketing downtown Manhattan right now. Now, at the time, I was back on the corner again of Broadway and Park Place. At that time, the police started running toward us, telling everybody to move who was left on the street. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down. Again, whoever was left on the street started stampeding. I'm in the office. Right now I'm in the main building of Pace University. People are crying. They have gas masks on their face. Authorities are making people go toward the basement. They're just doing anything that they can to move people away from the financial district. But again, it is a very horrifying scene down here, very eerie,
Okay.
like a ghost town.
Patty, let me interrupt you. Mayor Giuliani is on the telephone, is part of New York One's coverage. We join our affiliate for that.
Mayor Giuliani, since we have New Yorkers listening, and obviously their thoughts are with the people who are down there.
Urge them to remain calm, to remain at home, or to remain at their place of business, unless they're in Lower Manhattan. By that I mean south of Canal Street. If you're south of Canal Street, get out, walk, and walk slowly, carefully. There are plenty of police around, but just walk directly. If you can't figure out what else to do, just walk directly north. That'll get you out of the dangerous smoke area. It'll also do us a big favor. It'll open up those streets, because we're going to be moving a large number of ambulances and emergency personnel in and out of there all day. I've talked to the governor. He is putting the National Guard on alert so that they can relieve our police officers and our firefighters later this afternoon. And we've asked the federal government for help from the urban search and rescue team. So right now, we're using all of our police and firefighters and emergency personnel to help the people down there. Later on, we're probably going to need reinforcements.
Mayor Giuliani, I realize that it must be more than a chaotic situation, particularly since the bunker has been compromised and cordoned off. But can you give us any sense? There are so many people watching now who must have loved ones down in that area and are concerned of the systematic...
My heart goes out to them. I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of if there is, in fact, some system being implemented, what that system is, and where people are being taken?
People are triaging. People are being taken to every area hospital possible, even virtually within minutes. I drove down right past St. Vincent's Hospital, and I could see them actually on the street ready to take people, and that was within minutes of the first airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So the hospitals are ready. We'll be moving them to all different area hospitals, triaging them. The main thing is having those streets open so that we can get people in and out of the southern part of Manhattan as quickly as possible, so that we can move them, to hospitals all over the city.
And Mayor Giuliani, we'll let you...
in place. They're doing it. We just need the cooperation of people in getting out of there.
We'll let you get back to the operations there, and we do appreciate you taking the time for us here.
But once again, the only thing to do now is to remain calm and try to assist in the rescue effort.
Thank you.
Now let's pray.
That's New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani talking to a CNN affiliate New York One here, saying that clearly there's going to be tremendous number of lives lost on these attacks here in New York, urging people to stay calm and to leave the area calmly. The area is in the southern part of Manhattan. way down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The mayor urging people to calmly move north. CNN's Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, why don't you start, if you can, at the beginning here as we try and put some order to all of this. What happened?
Well, let me just describe the scene that we have here, and I'll back up a little bit. But right now I'm looking at the charred facade of the Pentagon, a huge gaping hole on the side where the Pentagon heliport is located, the side that faces Arlington Cemetery. In front of me is a long line of rescue personnel with backboards. They're just waiting for victims to be brought out so they can rush them to nearby medical facilities. I see a few victims being treated on the grass outside the Pentagon. Firefighters continue to pour streams of water onto the side of the building, and a huge black cloud of smoke continues to billow out. It is a scene of utter destruction here. I'm sure it pales in comparison to the World Trade Center, but I've never seen anything like this myself in the history of the Pentagon. There's been nothing like this. Again, a huge gaping hole. You can see the exposed 5 floors of the Pentagon. Offices just ripped apart. Our report is that an aircraft of some kind, and at least one witness identified it as a civilian aircraft, hit the side of the building shortly after the incident in the World Trade Center this morning. People who were in their offices nearby reported hearing a huge explosion, seeing shards of shrapnel come by their window. The entire Pentagon has been evacuated. Short time after this attack, there were urgent announcements made over the loudspeaker telling people to quickly get away from the building because they had reports of a second plane heading this way just 2 minutes away. F-16 jets were scrambled over the Pentagon. I saw several of them go by, but no second plane ever materialized, and the building remained completely evacuated as firefighters continue to pour columns of water on the devastated side of the Pentagon, and rescue personnel continue to whisk victims away. We have no report at this time of how many casualties. Clearly, dozens and dozens of people have been hurt, and we presume that there have been some deaths as well. It's hard to imagine otherwise, considering extensive damage at the side of the building. And I can see just some of the windows side, a stretch of the building, perhaps 40 or 50 feet wide. Just looks like it has collapsed under the weight of the impact. Aaron?
Jamie, thank you. So we have planes hitting the Pentagon, or plane hitting the Pentagon, 2 planes hitting the World Trade Center's towers in New York. Alan Dodds-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick white ash and building material. The ambulances have been coming now from as far as Long Island. All the rescue workers are being equipped with gas or face filter masks, and firefighters have been arriving even by pickup truck. Otherwise, the streets are now deserted.
Alan, thank you. Alan Dodds-Frank in Manhattan. A little more on this plane crash, which is the 4th incident, if you will. There was the plane crash at the Pentagon, crashing into the Pentagon. There were the 2 planes that hit the World Trade Center here in New York. And we don't know whether this 4th one is related or not, but the report is that a 747 en route from Chicago to New York City crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's the incident. That's what we are hearing.
Started crying and bawling. And I'm standing next to a fireman. He said, yeah, they just bombed the Pentagon, too.
Our colleague, Jeff Green, well, we have a little more sound here from witnesses.
I went to firewall company. The doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know.
in B tower. A tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
First one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
Anything else that you saw? Were you there for the second hit by the plane?
About 10 minutes later, the second building went off.
Did you see it?
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. A big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere. Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement. Came down. All of a sudden, the elevator blew up. Smoke. I dragged the guy out. His skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Thank you.
The words of some of the witnesses here in Manhattan this morning, and the pictures of what will, I suspect, before this is over, go down as one of the most horrific days in our lifetime. We're joined by our colleague, CNN's Jeff Greenfield.
Aaron, you know what? In 1993, when terrorists bombed the World Trade Center, their plan was to knock one of the towers into the other, bringing them both down. That disaster was averted, and bad as that was, in a sense, America was lucky. Another terrorist attack in the planning was interrupted to blow up the Lincoln Tunnel and submerge dozens, maybe hundreds of people. At the eve of the millennium, a suspected terrorist, was intercepted, you remember, at the Canadian border on his way to Seattle. And I know that not so long ago, former President Clinton, in a private talk to a group, ruminated on how lucky the United States has been over the years with the combination of luck and the skill of anti-terrorist people, to avoid such things. What we are seeing now is nothing less than the worst nightmare that one could imagine come to life, probably worse than anyone could have imagined. You may remember that Tom Clancy wrote a novel that ends with a terrorist hijacker crashing into the Capitol. The worst act of terrorist violence on American soil, the Oklahoma City bombing, killed fewer than 200 people. All we know today is that tens of thousands of people worked in that complex that has been destroyed. And I hate to say it this way, but this may be the day that America's luck ran out.
Well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, you look out here, and you see the Statue of Liberty to the right, and these buildings off to the left, the attacks on Washington. We don't know a lot about who's behind this or what this is all about, but the symbolism of these attacks is extraordinary. CNN's David Ensor is in Washington, and he joins us. David?
Aaron, I'm talking to U.S. officials who are obviously working on who is responsible for this. Their working thesis is that this is overseas terrorism, not domestic. They say they cannot rule out additional attacks yet to come. In terms of claims of responsibility so far, there is an Agence France-Presse report in which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. And there is also a report quoting personnel close to Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi accused terrorist, denying that that group was involved. But again, U.S. officials say they can't shed any light on whether these reports are correct or incorrect. Usually when this kind of attack occurs, you have claims of responsibility from all sorts of people who had nothing to do with it. So it's a very fluid situation at this point. But the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. As a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true. And obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the millennium a group of Algerians apparently involved in trying to arrange bombings in the United States, and now there is evidence being produced in court sessions that those Algerians were working for the bin Laden group. So that group certainly will come under immediate suspicion. There are very few others that could have pulled this off.
Right, I mean, just because of the enormity of it all and the sophistication required to stage these multiple attacks, this is not something some small cell can pull off. This is obviously a group or groups, well-financed and extraordinarily well-organized.
That's correct. Now, another thing you'll notice is that you remember the attack on the USS Cole in the Yemen harbor. That was the first time that kind of an attack using small boats with bombs in them had been used against an American warship. It worked once. Now the U.S. Navy has taken steps to make that much more difficult to do. Officials saying this may work once. They will now have to take measures to try to make sure that this kind of thing can't be done again. But these are apparently hijackings of civilian aircraft. So it was a sort of modus operandi that was dreamed up in some evil terrorist's mind and done on a massive scale here today, Aaron.
The Taliban spoke.
David, thank you. CNN's David Ensor, our national security correspondent, on what he is hearing, what he knows, what the reports are as we approach 11:20 Eastern Time. For those of you just joining us, and as you can see on your screen, the Taliban, the government in Afghanistan, expected to make a statement soon, and we'll monitor that for you. For those of you just joining us, let me try and put as many of these pieces together as I can as we stand
to assess the condition.
All right,
so
thank you.
very
We
much.
understand you have emergency work to do. We appreciate it very much taking the time out. The latest report that we have at this point from those who are in charge of that building, speaking to the director of the World Trade Center and also to the chief of the Port Authority Police, they are at this point, as they said, just trying to put together a plan to go in there and just assess the damage. This sequence of extraordinary tragedies, this sequence of catastrophes, really, first the two crashes, and then in sequence, one tower of the building coming down, another tower of the building coming down. Obviously, the first order of business is to try to organize themselves and to go back in there in a way it doesn't endanger more emergency workers, because I can tell you, based on what I've seen, there have been a number of emergency workers who were put in harm's way this morning. They had to be, but the toll has to be extraordinary. Tom, we'll throw it back to you.
Thank you very much, Pat Dawson. Those are the first numbers that we've had this morning. They think there were about 20,000 people in the two buildings at the time of the attack, to say nothing of the untold number of people on the streets or in nearby buildings who could also have suffered injuries or worse when the buildings did come down. This is tantamount to war. You're looking at the lower end of Manhattan. A plane has attacked the Pentagon this morning as well. There is a report of a hijacked plane that went down near Pittsburgh. NBC's Robert Hager is tracking all of this through the FAA for us. Robert?
Well, there's some more information now on the one confirmed hijacking that we know of, and that was that American Airlines flight number 11. It was a 767, took off from Boston Logan this morning. It was to go to Los Angeles. American Airlines confirmed it was hijacked, and we have some first numbers on how many were on board. 58 passengers and a crew of 11, so 69 people on that flight. That's presumed to be one of the planes that went into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. The other planes that we know of, the other tower of the World Trade Center and the plane that went that crashed into the Pentagon area, those are unknown flights. The Pennsylvania crash, which is still not the FAA, but it's local authorities saying it, our affiliate in Pittsburgh has heard traffic on the radio scanners saying that it was a flight that originated in Chicago and was headed to Cleveland, but I'd caution that that sort of information coming off radio scanners is very, very sketchy and so very unreliable, but it's the first report off the scanners.
Bob, an FBI spokesman is quoted as saying that there were 4 flights that were hijacked altogether. We know about American 11. I'm not going to mention the names of the carriers or the numbers on the others. Are you getting any kind of detail like that at the FAA?
No, the FAA is not getting into that kind of detail, and a moment ago I said that they said there were several planes still in the air.
So that's what happened in New York. At about the same time, and again, I don't want to put times on much of this yet, after one of these hijacked planes hit the Trade Center in New York, events started to unfold in Washington. A plane hit the Pentagon. And then there was a major fire at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon has now been evacuated. The State Department has been evacuated. The president, who was in Florida, went before cameras to denounce, as you would expect, and as we would expect, this terrorist attack, promising to hunt down those responsible. It was the president himself who first used, at least as I heard the story unfold today, the word terrorism. There was no doubt in his mind, at least. The president now is heading back. We are now getting a report from that American Airlines says that one of its flights, a flight from Boston to, I believe, Los Angeles, correct me guys if I'm wrong, is down, or at least they've lost contact with it. 81 people on board. This would be the second of American Airlines flights to have been involved, presumably, in this event. Another flight, this one from Dulles to Los Angeles, is down with 54 passengers on board. So again, so there are two American Airlines, one Dulles, Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, the other Boston to Los Angeles. Both American Airlines planes reported by the airline to be down. It is also believed that an American Airlines plane, a 767, was involved in one of the hits on the Trade Center as well. We don't know if there's a reason why it is American and not any other. We won't speculate as to whether there is or not. We'll just tell you what the facts are as we get them, and that's what we have. American says two of its planes down, and I assume that is two other than the one that hit the Trade Center, and you guys check that out to make sure I'm right.
And we have a report of a crash in Somerset County, outside of Pittsburgh.
Right, I believe a 767, though we're getting reports perhaps a 747, which doesn't quite fit into what we believe flies Chicago to New York, is also down as well, and I do not know the airline involved there. Let me just go back okay, I do now. It's a United Airlines plane. So we have a number of planes down, a number of planes involved in these attacks. The Boston to Atlanta, if I'm reading the notes correctly, had an American 767 with 81 passengers on board, 9 flight attendants, 2 pilots.
Flight 11
reported down. That's American Airlines Flight 11. And American Airlines Flight 77, which is a 757 jetliner, Dulles Airport outside of Washington to Los Angeles International, with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots, also reported down. And then there is this United Airlines jet which crashed about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh.
We should also mention, I think, Aaron, that inevitably some of these early fragmentary reports are going to be needing correction, and that will be done as soon as possible. We had a report of a second hijacked plane on the way to Washington. Capitol Police were reporting that there have been no signs of that plane. We simply, at this point in this awful story, have to just tell our viewers we will do everything we can to report this accurately. If fragmentary reports need amending or correcting, that will be done immediately.
And I think in fairness here, there is in a number of places right now, perhaps 4 or 5, chaos. And numbers that come out aren't necessarily going to hold up. And in our reporting, we will be a bit conservative on some of this until we track it down. There's no point in allowing this thing to seem worse than it is. It is already horrendous, and we don't need to make it any worse by misstating numbers, and we want you to keep that in mind. CNN Medical Unit reports that the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control, is preparing bioterrorism teams to respond to the incidents. This, we are told, is simply precautionary. We have absolutely no reports and no evidence that there is any biochemical or bioterrorism going on, but clearly what is happening in every department of the United States government, and I suspect in every department of most major cities right now, the plan that they hope they never have to implement, the plan that they spent years preparing, is now in effect, not just here, not just in Washington, but around the country, because no one knows precisely where this is going. CNN, my colleague Judy Woodruff joins us from Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we've been watching this here in the Washington Bureau. I'm in the studio now just a few blocks from the Capitol, from the United States Capitol, and the first thing I want to tell you is that everyone I'm sure on their minds is God rest the souls of those who've lost their lives this morning in New York, in Washington, near Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. It is just a story for which there are no words to describe. Here in Washington, we are keeping a very close watch on the Pentagon.
A huge ball of fire, you see it right there. And that was just the beginning of a sequence of events that, from what we can tell, has turned out very tragic.
We had the mayor a short time ago
Yes.
say, quote, "I sense a horrendous number of lives have been lost." Obviously, rescue workers raced to the scene, firefighters attempting to put out those blazes. They didn't have much luck because, as you will shortly see, it was about an hour and a half after the first attack that the first of the towers collapsed. A horrendous and horrific sight for all of us to witness here in New York City.
There you see that happening right now. And we've been told witnesses have actually described this scene as raining bodies, people jumping from the building, people thrown from the building by the explosions. Just a horrific scene downtown. We believe the number of people working in the two towers is about 50,000. How many of those survived this? We have no idea how many were actually at work at the time of the explosions and the accidents.
Rescue workers, we were told, worked as fast as they could to get people out of the lower parts of those towers in between the time of the fire and the collapse. And here you see the second collapse. There was about an hour and a half between the first plane and the first collapse, and then the second one happened probably about 15 or 20 minutes later.
Now, they may have evacuated the area, but we understand the firefighters were there trying to put the fire out. There were armed guards around the World Trade Center. We do not know how many of them actually survived this. As you see, these are firefighters that were around the buildings when it collapsed. Fortunately, they were able to dig themselves out, but obviously they are in shock, distress. Witnesses who have seen this. It's just pandemonium downtown, and right now, let's go down to Lower Manhattan. Gabe Pressman is standing by live. Gabe?
Hello, Gabe. Can you hear us?
Yeah, is that Jane?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Gabe, you're in Lower Manhattan. What are you witnessing right now?
Well, people down here by the hundreds and by the thousands, I'd say. I'm at the corner of Leonard and West Broadway. At first they were stunned. Now they are angry. Basically bewildered by the sight they saw of this building burning. I'm using, because my cell phone's not working, and none of them apparently is, I'm using a telephone in a diner, and the manager of the diner is Ted Karunas. What did you see, and what are your feelings right now, Mr. Karunas?
I watched the second building collapse, and it just brought tears to my eyes. I'm in utter shock. I'm walking around numb. This is unbelievable. I thought I saw the sight of a lifetime when I saw the second fireball explode into the building, but watching both Twin Towers fall down. I mean, I was born and raised in New York City, and to see them fall like that, I guess it's time to go to war. I mean, just nothing but anger, fear, and just rage going through me right now.
You just can't contain your emotions.
It's crazy. 1 second you feel like you're going to cry and you're shaking like a leaf, and the next second you wish there was someone in front of you that you could physically harm because of this. So it's very intense.
There is an endless stream of traffic, of ambulances going by this spot south on West Broadway. Incredible number of ambulances. I counted 10 in less than a minute. There's a young man here sitting at the counter in the diner. What happened to you?
I was coming out of the subway for a graduation pictures day, and I saw everyone looking. I went. A woman was on the ground. I just got my Red Cross certification, so I started helping her.
Where was that?
That was right on the corner of Chambers and I don't know whatever street this is.
What about you? I understand your sister is safe. Is that right?
She is. Thank God. She works at 2 World Trade, but she heard on the news, and her husband advised her not to go to work. So thank God she's okay.
You thought for a while that she was in the building?
We did. She was in the building last time. The the explosion. So thank God she wasn't. My name is Cheryl Charles White.
And you're from what borough?
I'm from Brooklyn. I was on my way to work. The train got diverted. It skipped Fulton Street. We got up at Park Place. There was smoke. We had to evacuate, and the police ushered us forward. And you're seeing people covered with soot. There was this woman. She had no shoes on. Her feet were bleeding. It was just amazing.
What are your feelings about the people who did this?
They're animals. I just can't believe it. It's just unbelievable. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
Another lady here.
Incidentally, her sister, and by God's grace, we're together. I work for the Bank of New York, and a few blocks away, and my name is Sandra.
Thank you. Okay, so that's some of the feelings and the statements here by people who've been involved in this. Incidentally, I tried to get down to the World Trade Center on a subway, and I was stuck for about 45 minutes, and finally they let us out at 23rd Street. In any event, that's the story from here, Jane, and I don't know who's sitting with you at the moment.
It's Glenn and Jim Rosenfield. Thank you very much, Gabe.
Yes.
We should also point out that they are trying to assess when they can physically get into the ruins of those two buildings to see if there are people trapped, because we don't know if that is part of the circumstances right now.
Some 50,000 people on a normal day would be working in those two towers. We did hear on NBC they estimated today perhaps as many as 20,000 people working in those two buildings.
This has obviously created some chaos as far as transportation goes. A lot of people need to get back to their loved ones.
Boy,
they want to get out of town.
Bear with us here. We do have a lot of information, and it is changing by the minute. But this is what we know about some of the transportation issues, some of the hospitals involved. Let's start with the hospitals. We know victims have been taken to St. Vincent's Hospital. We heard from Melissa Russo just a little while ago when we were on the air earlier. We also know victims have been taken to NYU downtown. That hospital is telling us hundreds of victims are being taken there and are seeking treatment at NYU downtown. A third hospital, Bellevue Hospital, will also be expecting to treat patients. We should also mention, it probably is obvious, but this is a major primary day here in New York City. The primary has been canceled, so it goes without saying that will be rescheduled. Speaking of the hospitals, we want to go to NYU Hospital right now, and Leonard Aubrey has an update for us from the scene there. Mr. Aubrey, what can you tell us?
Well, as you may know, we are several blocks away from the World Trade Center, and I think as you just had in your report, we have seen hundreds of patients right now. We have about 20 to 30 what I would call very serious cases, and we had 3 patients, unfortunately, who passed away upon arrival at the hospital. So that's where we are right now, and we're very well set up to take patients as they, or if they continue to come in through the day. Hello?
Can you hear us? What kind of injuries are you seeing? Burns, lacerations, can you tell us?
Well, a lot of that, and a lot of smoke inhalation, a lot of smoke problems. We're using a lot of oxygen tanks and so on to give people oxygen. And of course, as you mentioned, lacerations, a number of more serious orthopedic injuries, broken bones, and so on. And we have had a couple of cases which we've had to transfer. One was a significant burn, which was transferred up to the Cornell burn unit, and the second neurosurgical case, which was transferred up to NYU Medical Center in Midtown.
You still getting a steady stream of ambulances to the hospital?
Yes, at the point, yes. Yes, so I can't give you exact numbers because they change quite frequently.
But you do have, you mentioned 130 people with what you would call serious injuries.
No, we had over 100 in the hundreds of minor injuries. We had 30 people, roughly 30 people with what we call red. We have a code here, green, yellow, red, the red being the most serious. And we had 30 of those, plus an additional 3 patients passed away upon arrival at the hospital.
Mr. Aubrey, we thank you very much, and obviously we will be talking back with you later this morning. Those are the first 3 confirmed dead that we've had. that have gone into the hospital here, but we have a fax here from American Airlines which suggests that they've lost an awful lot of people in aircraft today, and it said that it lost 2 aircraft in tragic incidents, and this Flight 11, which is the one we believe smashed into one of the World Trade Center towers.
The second crash.
It was en route from Boston to Los Angeles, had 81 passengers on board, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. So obviously those will be added to the casualty list that we are beginning to hear about here in New York City.
And of course, 2 other planes from United Airlines were also hijacked. One of those going from Newark to San Francisco, that is the plane that crashed in western Pennsylvania. And we just have it coming over wire. It's another plane crash.
We are getting a confirmation now that it was a flight, one of the other aircraft that crashed was the one you were just talking about, the one from
Okay, we have a confirmation on that. All right, right now, let's get another report from a hospital. Melissa Russo, our government affairs reporter, is standing by. I believe it's St. Vincent's Hospital, Melissa?
Yes, Glenn. We just had a briefing from hospital officials here at St. Vincent's. They are now reporting more than 112 injured patients have been brought into St. Vincent's. And their message today is that they're in desperate need of blood. You have literally hundreds of people lining up on 7th Avenue to donate blood. A hospital official told me earlier that they're very worried about the blood supply of the city hospitals being completely tapped out. And so they're asking people to donate blood. They're seeing injuries ranging from broken bones to burns to smoke inhalation. I don't know if you've been able to see any of the pictures yet, but the people being brought out of the ambulances are absolutely covered in soot, concrete, debris. You open the doors of the ambulance to bring these people out, and you just see the dust fly in the air. It's just unbelievable. They're literally covered in this grayish-colored dust. At least 2 people in the hospital at St. Vincent's have been put into the operating room. That number may have gone up by now. They have triage teams on site, more than 200 doctors working. In addition, they've been transporting doctors from St. Vincent's Hospital down to the scene of Lower Manhattan to work on scene. They have been bringing in additional shipments of hospital supplies. I saw one truck being unloaded about an hour ago with syringes, additional IV materials, and that trauma center, that makeshift trauma center that I told you about over an hour ago on 7th Avenue is still in place. At this point, they appear to be out of wheelchairs. They're using office chairs covered in sheets to transport patients. They do have some locations where people can go to donate blood. I guess one of the questions will be whether people will be able to reach those locations. On Staten Island, they're asking people able to donate blood to go to St. Vincent's Hospital. In Queens, there are 3 hospitals where people can donate blood if you're in proximity of that hospital: St. Joseph's, St. John's, and Mary Immaculate Hospitals. In Brooklyn, St. Mary's Hospital, and here in Manhattan, St. Vincent's and St. Clair's, desperately in need of blood this morning.
Can you repeat those just one more time, Melissa, because that's really important information and it went by quickly.
I sure can. On Staten Island, St. Vincent's Hospital. In Queens, if you're within proximity of St. Joseph's, St. John's, or Mary Immaculate Hospitals, you can go there to donate blood. If you're in Brooklyn, St. Mary's Hospital. Here in Manhattan, St. Clair's and St. Vincent's. One more thing I should mention, Edward Cardinal Egan is here on the scene in blue hospital garb, and he just spoke as well with a message for New Yorkers. He invited New Yorkers to join in prayer. He said that this is a tragedy that this great city can handle. He said he's amazed at the goodness of firefighters and hospital personnel who are willing to do everything to save life at this moment. And he asked the Lord to bless us at this moment. Edward Cardinal Egan on the scene here at St. Vincent's, clearly trying to help calm the city in the wake of this tragedy. On 7th Avenue, police are working very hard to move the crowd along. People just stop and gaze down 7th Avenue, where there used to be a perfect view of the World Trade Center, the 2 towers. I was here earlier when those buildings collapsed, and there was just absolute panic here on 7th Avenue outside the hospital. People just staring at what used to be the Twin Towers and had now turned into a cloud of smoke, and people are just in shock here.
And a blood shortage, as Melissa mentioned, and that's certainly, if anybody does feel the need to get out, then that is certainly something that would be very important, I would think, at this time.
Especially if you're anywhere close to one of those hospitals.
Absolutely.
There is something that has just come across from the Associated Press, which says a police official in New York says the number of casualties from today's attack on the World Trade Center could be in the thousands. And again, we have only begun to hear the reports of people who have been injured and who have been killed in this attack.
A lot of loved ones worried about children in schools. And in Lower Manhattan, there are 3 schools where youngsters are being walked to another location, to another school, just to be safe. I'll give you those 3 schools that are involved. PS 89, youngsters are being walked to PS 41. That's PS 89, where the youngsters are being walked to PS 41. PS 234, the youngsters also being taken to PS 41. And PS 150, youngsters are being taken to PS 3. We had heard earlier that several schools were being used as triage centers, among them Stuyvesant High School, but as we saw earlier on our network, it appeared that Stuyvesant High School was being evacuated because of concerns about yet another bomb. So that's the latest we have on the school situation.
Once again, we should also tell people that you simply cannot come into this city right now by car, by train, by subway, by bus, and it is best that you stay put exactly where you are. Now, of course, that also means that a lot of people who had already come into the city for work today, there's not a lot of work going on, I can assume, which means that they probably are trying to leave the city, and that in itself can be a little difficult.
I do know that New Jersey Transit, which, as you mentioned, has suspended inbound service, but they are, we are told, putting extra trains to get the folks out of Manhattan.
Okay.
That's New Jersey Transit. Long Island Railroad has suspended service in both directions, from Jamaica to Penn Station and from Jamaica to Flatbush. Bus service, there isn't any, as you would imagine, south of 14th Street, and they are evaluating service for the rest of the city and to other boroughs right now as we speak.
Okay, right now, let's go back to NBC News with national coverage of this story, which of course is breaking not only in New York, but also in Washington and around the rest of the country.
We will be back in a
steel
bit.
and concrete that came cascading down as well and hit other places.
I imagine the collateral damage was enormous, but we were probably, I'd say, 2 or 3 blocks away in a building where we holed up for a time until we were fairly comfortable that it was safe to come out. It was truly the most intense and frightening experience I've ever had in my life. It was literally pitch black on the street, and people were, obviously inhaling a great deal of this material as well, so there are many folks who are having difficulty breathing and were wearing facial masks as well.
We're happy you're
all right. We have United Airlines confirms that United Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles is down as well. No details yet. It's confirmed that Flight 93, we believe from Newark to San Francisco, is down. No details as yet. That's the one that we think went down in the Pittsburgh area. I wish that we could be more specific. The information is, as you might expect, pretty chaotic, but there have been at least 4 airliners that have been hijacked today.
And Tom, there's going to be an awful lot of scrutiny on the security in Boston at Logan Airport, because it now appears that 2 of these flights originated there, and somehow someone managed to get on these planes and hijack them.
Well, this is an event, Ron, we're happy to see you. And
thank you. You have no idea how happy I am to be here.
Yeah, it is a relief, but then you think about the experiences of thousands of other people who are down there in the epicenter of all that, and were there when it occurred. Our hearts go out to them. We don't know what the numbers are yet.
And you hear about Cardinal Egan delivering last rites outside of St. Vincent's Hospital.
And the magnitude of this will go on for some time. This is not just a national tragedy, but this is a national security event of an untold magnitude that this country is going to have to deal with. The president's coming back, and we are at war, in effect, here. This country has suffered a devastating attack that will cost us in the sense of in loss of life. It will also cost us in terms of our psychological security that we have in this country. We're going to have to revisit a lot of our freedoms as a result of this kind of an attack. And then, of course, there's the whole question of retaliation.
This is an
Who is
upsetting,
responsible and what do we do?
Tom, this is an upsetting wire that just came across the transom from the West Bank. It says thousands of Palestinians celebrated Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States, chanting God is great and distributing candy to passers-by, even as their leader, Yasser Arafat, said he was horrified. The U.S. government has become increasingly unpopular in the West Bank and Gaza Strip in the past year of Israeli-Palestinian fighting, with many Palestinians accusing Washington of siding with Israel.
For those of you who think that events in far-off places like the Middle East or in Afghanistan or in the subcontinent or in places in Asia have no effect on us, this is the answer today. This place remains an enormous target in the eyes of a lot of people, and we are so vulnerable because of all those things that make us so great, our freedoms and our sense of security that we have. But America has been changed today by all of this.
We want to go and find out more about what's being done for those who were injured in these attacks. Leslie Van Sant is with the American Red Cross. I believe she's joining us from Washington. Ms. Van Sant, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Matt.
Tell me what kind of resources you have available to you to pour into these areas where, obviously, in Lower Manhattan and in Washington, D.C. and outside Pittsburgh.
Well, our chapters on the area are local disaster volunteers. You know, they are, of course, the first people on the scene and responding. Unfortunately, probably now some of them are also victimized by the event. We're also mobilizing 80,000 units of blood to transfer to the regions as needed, and, you know, taking guidance from emergency management personnel on what assistance we can provide to them to make this, you know, response go smoothly.
Is there anything that, I mean, I know it's early after this has happened, but is there anything you can think of that people might be able to help you out with in terms of donating certain things? You mentioned blood and those things.
Well, you know, we're asking people who are in other parts of the country who are blood donors or maybe not blood donors, maybe they could call and schedule an appointment so we can make sure that the supply stays ready. Our disaster volunteers, our mental health volunteers and health volunteers are going to be responding. You know, this will, as Tom mentioned earlier, this is going to be a long, long response. The emotional trauma, the emotional impact is going to be felt weeks, months into the future, even years. So we're going to be working very hard at this for a long time.
All right, Leslie Van Sant with the American Red Cross. Ms. Van Sant, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Let's go now to Kathleen Zici of New York University Hospital, which is about 5 minutes away from the World Trade Center, where many of the victims have been brought. Kathleen, I know we spoke to you about an hour or so ago. Can you tell me what's going on in the hospital now? Okay, apparently we're having some problems with Kathleen, and I'm sure it's as chaotic there as it was at St. Vincent's, where we heard from Bob Bazell moments ago that there was a line with Cardinal Egan outside delivering last rites to some of the dead who were brought to the hospital. So we'll try to touch base with Kathleen in just a moment. But first we want to go to Andrea Mitchell once again in Washington. Andrea?
I've been told that the State Department evacuation, Katie, was precautionary only. There was no car bomb, as had at least been reported or rumored, not here on NBC. But in any case, that was precautionary only. There are still some officials there. They are now being redeployed to another location in Virginia. The CIA is still operational. Intelligence officials are still meeting at Langley, but those officials have also evacuated the non-essential employees. The current working theory, as you have been reporting and speculating, is that there is only one terror organization in this world that could coordinate this kind of event, and that would be something operated by Osama bin Laden. Intelligence officials say he is in Afghanistan, where he has been protected by the Taliban, and as we know, the United States has warned the Taliban government of Afghanistan that if there were any attack against the United States, that they would hold Afghanistan responsible, so that we most likely will expect retaliation, military retaliation. But I think right now the full focus of the U.S. government is on finding out how many other possible targets there might be, how many vulnerabilities there might be, making sure that there is no chemical or biological element out there. I spoke to a former Secretary of Defense, Bill Cohn, and others who had been part of the anti-terror operation planning, and they say that those are the first lines of defense to make sure that there is not some other event, unexpected as this obviously was, that could make Americans vulnerable. Obviously, this is the largest intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor. Katie?
All right, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, thank you. We're going to check in again right now with Kathleen Zici of New York University Hospital. Kathleen, tell me what the scene is like at your hospital.
Well, we're at NYU Downtown Hospital in Lower Manhattan, and we have had a steady stream of patients coming through the door since the first explosion occurred some hours ago. We have information at this point on 3+ fatalities, plus because there may be additional fatalities that have not yet been informed of. We have had a severe burn case. One individual is an amputee, a serious neurosurgical injury, a whole range of injuries from both debris, smoke inhalation, respiratory issues related to smoke and debris from the collapse of the two buildings.
So how many medical personnel, Kathleen, do you have working there at NYU Hospital?
We have a medical staff of 500 plus physicians. The entire medical staff has been mobilized, as has the nursing staff, and they are working as hard as it's possible to work.
And tell me again, Kathleen, I know it's hard to estimate how many people you've seen so far?
It's in the hundreds. Our entire cafeteria has been transformed to a triage area, and it is wall-to-wall people at the present time.
All right, Kathleen, thank you very much for that update. I'm sure we'll be checking back with you a bit later on, and thank you very much.
Katie, let's go now to NBC's Bob Hager. And Bob, I think it's important that we recount. A short while ago, we were talking about 4 planes that were unaccounted for. It seems now we know what happened to all those 4 planes, isn't it?
That's it. There's no plane at the moment that we know of that's outstanding that's unaccounted for. And now NTSB is able to match the particular flights to the particular accidents or acts of terrorism. So the 2 planes that hit the World Trade Center were both takeoffs from Boston, one belonging to American Airlines, and it had been bound for Los Angeles. The other belonging to United Airlines, it too was bound for Los Angeles. Those are the 2 planes, the American airliner first and then the United plane, that went into the World Trade Center. The other 2 flights, the one that went into the Pentagon was an American Airlines flight bound from Washington's Dulles Airport to Los Angeles, and the plane that's down southeast of Pittsburgh is a United flight. It had been bound from Newark to San Francisco. I heard one report that it was Newark via Washington National to San Francisco, but I'm not sure of that. Let me tell you the flight numbers. The Boston takeoffs were American Airlines Flight 10. It had 92 aboard. That's one of the ones that hit the World Trade Center.
Bob, let me just interrupt you there for a second, because we've been reporting all morning that it was American Airlines Flight 11.
You know, I'm mistaken. You're right. It's 11. American Flight 11. Thank you very much, with 92 aboard. And then the United Airlines that left from Boston and hit the other World Trade Center tower was United's 175. I don't have a figure on how many on board it. The flight that went into the Pentagon was American Airlines Flight 77, bound Washington Dulles to Los Angeles. There were 64 people aboard it, and the United Airlines flight that went down south of Pittsburgh was United's Flight 93, and there's no number on the number of passengers on it. But again, you have 4 flights known to have been hijacked, known to have crashed, and no flights at the moment that are outstanding that we know of.
Bob, that the crash that you just mentioned near Pittsburgh, I just want to say that that is a United flight that was en route from Newark to San Francisco. Is that accurate?
That's what I have, and I've heard it 2 ways. It's Newark to San Francisco. I heard one report that there was an intermittent stop that it was to make at Washington's Reagan National, but that's not confirmed, so it might be erroneous.
Yeah, United is now confirming that, apparently, Robert. We also have a report from the mayor of Cleveland, Michael White, saying that a Boeing 767 out of Boston made an emergency landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport because of concerns it may have a bomb on board, but no confirmation of
We
that.
also have, just because I have a personal friend who was flying from Kennedy to Los Angeles this morning, that plane was diverted to Kansas City. So apparently many planes that were en route to certain locations have made special emergency landings in the wake of this, and because of concerns that there may be more problems aboard more airplanes.
And what happens, unfortunately, in situations like this, if the terrorists themselves don't call in to say that there's a bomb on board, you have the twisted minds of other people who call in and say, well, by the way, there's a bomb on board that flight. So it is chaos in the skies for those flights that were already in the air. Other flights have been grounded. This country has been immobilized in terms of where its attention now is focused on New York City and Washington, D.C. the tragedies in Pittsburgh as well. No air travel, no financial markets. All national monuments are being evacuated. The president has been rushed back to Washington, D.C. The Pentagon has been attacked by an airliner, in effect, and on Capitol Hill, code red. The Speaker of the House was taken to a very secure area because he's third in line succession to the President of the United States. We are, as we have been saying this morning, in a state of war with terrorism.
And as a result, the Army has been placed at ThreatCon Delta. That means that armed personnel will be guarding U.S. installations, not only here in the United States, but in other parts of the world. You're looking at the southern tip of Manhattan Island here in New York City, and for so many years we've come accustomed to seeing the World Trade Center standing there in the background behind the Empire State Building that you see in the foreground. Those two towers no longer stand after a terrorist attack this morning. NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat,
Matt,
can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Matt. If there is a war against terrorism that started, rather ongoing right now, it started here at about 8:45 this morning, as you described, a big hole in the skyline at the southern end, the southern tip of Manhattan Island, where the two World Trade Center towers have stood for the last 25 years, 110 stories high. They are no longer there. Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department, who was obviously one of the first people here on the scene after those two planes were crashed into the side, we assume, of the World Trade Center towers, which used to be behind me over there. Chief Albert Turry told me that he was here just literally 10 or 15 minutes after the events that took place this morning. That is the first crash. He said that at one point he had roughly 10 alarms. That would equate to roughly 200 to 225 New York City firefighters who were in the building. This was after the crash, trying to rescue civilians who were in there. Now, earlier this morning on the Today Show, we spoke to the director of the World Trade Center. He said that at that hour of the morning, you could have upwards of 10,000 people in each of those towers. That would be 20,000 people total in each tower. The chief of safety, as I said, chief safety of the Fire Department of New York City, told me that shortly after 9 o'clock, he had roughly 10 alarms, roughly 200 men in the building trying to effect rescues of some of those civilians who were in there, and that basically he received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place, and then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. So obviously, according to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. One of the secondary devices he thinks that took place after the initial impact he thinks may have been on the plane that crashed into one of the towers. The second device he speculates was probably planted in the building. So that's what we have been told by Albert Turry, who is the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He told me that just moments ago. Now, we are continuing to hear explosions. Here downtown, and what we've been told by some of the fire officials is that there are some gas lines that occasionally are exploding down there, because obviously, as you can imagine, there are a lot of open gas lines down in the southern part of Manhattan where the World Trade Center towers used to be. As far as the situation right here, basically what we have are hundreds of New York City firefighters and other New York City rescue units who are massed here. There is a cordon just down there. We are not sure, to be honest, if some rescue workers have tried to go beyond that point as yet. When we spoke to the head of the Port Authority Police, that would be the organization that is in charge of the World Trade Center building itself, the Port Authority Police chief told us that they were at that point, about, I'd say 40 minutes ago, about to make a decision on whether or not it was safe